The Verlaines have been in existence meaningfully since about 1981 in various guises. We're currently working on our 10th studio album, which is a double album in the mixing stage, and I teach music at Otago University. The last album that we put out is called Untimely Meditations, which came out in 2012, 13-ish. And it has a very long song on it called Last Will and Testament. The album's on Bandcamp if you want to check it out. And a lot of it's prophecy, you know, my last will, what's being left to the world. And one of the lines is drones and polonium and the pen losing ground again, which is quite a good line really. But a lot of this has been connected with, a lot of my writing's been connected with American politics over the last 8 years or more. And when I drafted the lyric for AWCWD, it was in 2013, so I was looking 3 years ahead to the next presidential election on the basis of the previous one, which had just transpired. And I, like everybody else in the world, probably sat there with a tear. Well, I did have a tear in my eye when Obama was elected the first time, but noting the second time in 2012, the atmosphere was completely different. It was kind of like, basically, he's the better choice of the two, but there wasn't actually much hope and evidence in the whole election process. And so I wrote a song called Church and State about the election process, and the two of them, of the two, the world is asking whether one's the other's twin, because it's shades of grey and no light of day for the plight some folks are in. That was the electoral process. And so AWCWD was a companion song to that I drafted in 2013. And I hope the WW would give it away in terms of the sense that the policies of George W. Bush had largely rolled on. But in looking forward, I was making the prophecy of what those letters stand for. Is any war criminal will do. And so that's being totally open about it. It's been interesting. I've talked to a bunch of people about that too, in the sense that they see that pattern. Is that the stage that we're at now, at the time of talking, you know, Donald Trump saying all sorts of crazy things, and he's going to possibly get the nomination, but he's already having to talk to the power base, Paul Ryan and all the other big establishment figures. And to a certain extent, he's going to have to compromise. And so it's a prediction, and the reason why I haven't managed to get this album out, because it's been too big and I've had other projects on. But I went, right, I'll go to the thing that I never do, which is make a music video, so that at least it's out there before the election gets very much further. The message is that things seem to have been getting worse rather than better on a global scale, and will probably continue to, no matter who gets elected, because the office brings with it a certain amount of keeping the status quo going, and all that entails. Why do I choose music? That's a really interesting question that I've been thinking long and hard about. I watched an interview of Jon Stewart by David Axelrod over the weekend, and he's such a wonderful intellect and speaker, and he says one should never confuse satire with activism. I mean, it can do certain things, and it may prod people to think, but it isn't activism. And he was saying this in the context of the 9/11 first responders sort of lobbying for healthcare for 9 years before they got it, of which he was a part of. Satire, I mean, I watch satire. I love Jon Stewart's work. I watch Lee Camp every week on Redacted Tonight, who's amazingly insightful and funny. But I can't remember the week before. I mean, satire is something that, you know, he makes devastating point after devastating point throughout the program. But it happens, and then it kind of like it just flies off into the ether. So a kind of protesting song is not activism either, but it's a little more powerful than satire in that it has music, because music will lodge in the memory more than a a quick one-liner in a satirical show. So that's why I'm a songwriter and not stand-up comic. Because I've dedicated my life to learning music and studying music, and in particular some of the best musical satirists that have been, including Mahler and Shostakovich, and supervised a master's on Kurt Weill a couple of years ago, right the way back to Beethoven, who I study intensely, and whose tone is sort of sometimes rude and brusque and dismissive. And so I try to glean what I can from these languages and put it into my musical language. So it's just not, music is so important to what the whole thing is trying to do, because it can create a whole layer of unease, or even in some instances disgust that a poem alone can't do, or a skit in a comedy show can't really do. So that's why it's music. Randy Newman is obviously the great father of all this in terms of American song, even though I'm not American. I mean, I'm very, attached to his techniques. Tom Waits sometimes, and God's Away on Business. I've been listening to some hip hop in the last few years as well, although I don't, I'm never going to be a hip hop artist and don't want to be one. And I have a theory about that too. The problem with it is that the style is too easy to imitate and put the complete opposite content into it in terms of what it's thinking about, whereas my music is pretty darn hard to imitate because of the way that I make it and the complexity that I wield in the harmonic sphere. So it's those people do loom large, but as I say, I'm working a lot of influence from a lot of classical composers. It does sound a little bit jazzy because of some of the instrumentation, saxophones and that sort of thing, and some of the harmonies, but it doesn't sound like Brecht Weill either. I mean, I kind of call it punk jazz. There are jazz elements in it, but there's also a lot of counterpoint in it, which is sort of derived a little bit from Beethoven. So it's sort of familiar but not familiar at the same time, because I'm sort of slamming two different languages, three different languages potentially, because the harmony hasn't got any nice sevenths and ninths on it. It's balled straight to the point, triads. So yeah, it's classical, it's jazz, it's a little bit punk. Well, the album's got about 21 songs on it when we get through mixing them, and a lot of them are on discomforting subject matters. I hope some of them aren't, and a little bit more personal to balance things out. This particular song, AWC, WD, and Church and State, which I hope we might make a video for as well as a pair, are kind of, they're in exactly the same key with exactly the same instrumentation, so they're kind of like brother and sister songs addressing the same sort of issues. And actually in that whole thing of prophecy and writing something in 2013 and looking forward to what's going to happen in 2016, it obviously hasn't quite panned out, but the fact that Trump and Saunders have had such an influence on this presidential campaign, and a lot of people have just been running from the business as usual candidates. I think the song actually kind of does touch a nerve, and with people I've spoken to it about, even though we're here in New Zealand on the other side of the world and don't vote in the election, that we still have a concern about what the result will be and what the fate of millions around the world will be on account of it. They seem to feel that, yeah, that's kind of what's happening. There's a revolt going on. between, away from status quo politicians, and that in itself was interesting. So in a way, I think I've called something that's actually come to pass. I mean, it's using, the art of rhetoric, and Brutus is an honourable man. If you say it long enough and often enough, the W, I hope, would resonate. That the guy changes, but nothing else does. And I think people are, in the United States are feeling that. And even going back to the drones and polonium, there have been drone strikes under George Bush, been massively increased. And, we're facing a real crisis, that because of the foot traffic from everywhere, from Afghanistan and Pakistan all the way through to Syria and Libya, are all ending up on Europe's doorstep, and it's going to destroy the EU. And that's going to have massive, massive ramifications. It's just horrible to watch. Just, when you see film of that many people on the move, more than the end of the Second World War. We're dealing with something really heavy that needs a complete rethink of how the world does business, basically. Because of its time boundness, because situation's vacant, 2016, which it is. Mr. Obama has to go, and somebody else is going to end up in the job. So I went, right, well, I should get this one out first. The other one, Church and State, is a little bit about the last election anyway, but to a certain extent it will be ongoing. The primaries have happened and we know who's running on each side, because everything will change and it will start to become, as the song title suggests, a kind of a cross between a religious pulpit ceremony and political debate, probably more of the former than the latter, and then it will be just back to business as usual.